Hello to you. I do hope you're doing fine. I'm doing well. And let's look at topic 2 for us. And basically, I hope that we went through our first topic. And in case of any issues, kindly feel free to raise. And this one, basically, it's more about macronutrients. Remember, we introduced some few terminologies and I emphasized on macro and micronutrients, of which you said macro means what? Can you remember? Yeah, we say that those nutrients required in large amounts, whereas micro, meaning small, they're required in smaller amounts. So basically, macronutrients is a class of chemical compounds which humans consume in the largest quantities. That is, they must be above the threshold amount, and which provide humans with the bulk of energy. So we have quite a number of macronutrients that provide energy, and basically we have the proteins, the fats, and also the carbohydrates. So we find that the main function of the macronutrients is to provide energy, which we count as calories or kilocalories. That is the energy present in foods. We measure it by kilocalories or calories. The macronutrients provide varying calories. Carbohydrates usually provide 4 kilocalories per gram or calories per gram. Proteins 4 per gram, but fats provide 9. So that means if a label of food has 12 grams of carbohydrates, 2 grams of fat, and 0 grams of protein per serving, that food has 12 grams times 4 kilocalories, which is 48, then 2 grams by 4, which is 8 calories, and the total comes to 48 plus 8, which is 56 calories per serving. So macronutrients are also do have specific roles in maintaining the body, contribute to the taste, texture, and appearance of foods, which help make the diet more varied and enjoyable. So it's really important to have macronutrients in our diets, and we need to have varied. So when you talk about carbohydrates, in a nutshell, I do believe that you understand what carbohydrates are. Usually they're starchy, and we do have the simple and the complex carbohydrates. So the simple carbohydrates are usually composed of small molecules, generally monosaccharides or disaccharides, which increase the blood glucose levels rapidly. So about complex carbohydrates, they are composed of larger molecules, which are broken down into monosaccharides. Complex carbohydrates usually increase food glucose levels more slowly, but for a longer time, glucose and sucrose are simple carbohydrates, starches, and fiber, usually the complex carbohydrates. So, in terms, the foods that we eat, the rice, the unga number 1, this one that is very much sifted, those are very simple carbohydrates. But when you do like oats, they're whole because they have the husk. They're complete. When you do githeri, that is complex in itself. Yeah, I think you get the difference. When you do ngwashe, that is the sweet potatoes. When you do the ndumas, that is the Irish. Okay, you do the Irish, that is the waru. Then nduma, we have them as yams or yeah. As you do them, you are likely to have more of the complex carbohydrates because the glucose that is released from them is absorbed in smaller amounts within the bloodstream. But with simple carbohydrates like the bread, white rice, as you eat them, will you stay 4 hours without having felt hungry, or 2 hours? Within 2 hours, you're already feeling hungry and you're already reaching out for food. So that tells us that it's important to consume healthy diets in terms of carbohydrates. When you go to the simple ones, you go to the fatty diets like chips, bajia, and such fried foods. They'll be sweet to taste. Yes, as you said, carbohydrates will be sweet to taste. They give that taste and makes us enjoy food. At the end of the day, they're likely to bring about other disease conditions. So when you take a diet that is lesser in fiber, it is likely to bring about obesity, increased cholesterol, and also increase the risks of heart diseases. But if you do fruits and vegetables, they're likely to decrease the occurrence of such and other lifestyle conditions. So carbohydrates are usually important in the diet. because they're easily metabolized, that's chemically broken down and used as the body's main fuel source. All of our body tissues have the ability to use the simple carbohydrate glucose as energy. So when the body uses carbohydrates for energy, it can use other macronutrients for other jobs like tissue growth and repair, especially from the protein. So that means that carbohydrates usually provide protein sparing action. They spare the protein so that they can serve for tissue repair and growth rather than being used for energy. Then they also, carbohydrates help in the brain, kidneys, and muscles, and heart all need carbohydrates to function properly. Also, they do aid in synthesis of certain amino acids. Again, you'll find that fats can only be properly metabolized when carbohydrates are present. So that tells you every food that you eat that has some fat, there needs to be a carbohydrate present. And again, also for proper usage of proteins, carbohydrates should be present. So indigestible carbohydrates in the form of fiber are necessary for intestinal health. And with this, it will delay occurrence of hemorrhoids, it will prevent the colon cancers, those cancers related to the stomach, usually fiber helps prevent hallucinations. Okay, so that is about carbohydrates. What about proteins? When you talk about proteins, they are usually broken down into peptides and amino acids. So proteins are required for tissue maintenance, replacement, function, and growth. However, if the body is not getting enough calories from dietary sources or tissue sources, that is particularly from fat, protein may be used for energy. So usually the recommended amount for protein is 10 to 35% of the calories in the human diet, which is sufficient for the growth and repair. So proteins are important because they do help in the constitution of cells, that the major constituent of most cells, making up more than 50% of the dry weight. Also, protein defines what an organism is, what it looks like, and how it behaves because of the body. The body is proteins. Again, proteins are used to produce new tissues of growth and tissue repair, regulate and maintain functions. Also, enzymes used for digestion, protection, and makeup made of proteins. The habit again essential hormones used for body regulation require protein. Last but not least, proteins may be used as a source of energy when carbohydrates are not available. So that is why I find some people who are on a weight losing diet, they'll prefer doing a lot of protein compared to carbohydrates. They may do protein actually and leave out carbohydrates. But I would really recommend that they still do carbohydrates in a very small amount so that it can still work with the fats that could help the body function in a good way. So proteins are basically found in meat, poultry, fish, meat substitutes, cheese, milk, nuts, legumes, and in smaller quantities in starchy foods and also vegetables. What about fats? We've already mentioned that 1 gram of fat yields how many kilocalories? 9. So for every 1 gram that you consume of fat or fatty food, you're likely to gain at least 9 kilocalories in terms of energy from that given food. So fat is one of the main macronutrients, and it's broken down into fatty acids and glycerol. Fats are usually required for growth and hormone production. Saturated fatty acids, common in animal fats, tend to be solid at room temperature, except for palm and coconut oils. Fats derived from plants tend to be liquid at room temperature. These fats contain high levels of monounsaturated fatty acids or polyunsaturated fatty acids, are the PUFAs. So fat is frequently disparaged as a cause of rising obesity. It's actually suspected, or rather it has been highly linked to the rising obesity rates and problems associated with extra weight, such as disease, high cholesterol and diabetes, and making people think they need to avoid fat. In fact, fats are important in our diet for a number of reasons. So maybe we'll explore a number of reasons as to why fat is crucial. Yeah. So one of the functions of fats is that fats provide your body with energy and provide storage of energy in the body. They also help move the vitamins A, D, E, and K through the bloodstream and absorb them into the body. Fats also provide insulation for body temperature regulation by filling up the body's adipose tissues. And the essential fatty acids in fats also play a role in brain development, blood clotting, and managing inflammation. What's the significance of fats? Usually, our bodies can't make certain essential fatty acids, including linoleic acid. So it relies on the diet to provide them. So fat is the most powerful energy source with 9 kilocalories in every gram of fat, more than twice as much as energy that comes from proteins and also carbohydrates. So because calories from carbohydrates are usually within the first 20 minutes of exercise, your body relies on its fat source for energy. I think that one is quite clear that usually when you exercise within about 20 minutes, usually your carbohydrates are easily burned. You lose them and you're likely to feel hungry. So your body will rely on the stores of fat, adipose tissues to release energy for it to keep surviving. About fiber, we do have two types of fiber. We have the insoluble and soluble fiber. And remember, fiber is not digestible. It's among the indigestible carbohydrates. It's in plants, it's important for digestion. So when you do a diet that includes vegetables, beans, lentils, usually will meet the dietary requirements for fiber. Fiber is thought to have a wide-ranging influence on human health, including having gastrointestinal benefits and also reducing the risk of chronic diseases. So as mentioned, we have the soluble and insoluble fiber. The soluble fiber usually dissolves in water to become gummy or viscous, and it promotes the excretion of fatty substances such as cholesterol and helps to regulate the body's use of sugars. Whereas the insoluble fiber usually doesn't dissolve in water, but adds back to softness to stools. Thus, insoluble fiber promotes bowel regularity. So when you take both soluble and insoluble fibers, you're able to, one, regulate your blood glucose so that there are no spikes within the blood sugars. Like when you load your glucose by eating as you eat food, there'll be no way in which the glucose will go so high and cause the body to be shocked, nor as you eat will the body be frustrated in terms of bowel regularity. You will easily move your bowels and not constipate or have consistent stools. So benefits of dietary fiber. It promotes healthier bowel function, as I've already mentioned. It will help you to prevent constipation. So you'll not strain your bowel movements during the time of moving your bowels. So with this, it will help to prevent other conditions like the colon cancer, stomach cancers, the development of hemorrhoids and such. So those help to control the blood sugar levels, of which you've mentioned, like the soluble fiber, will help to regulate the rapid rise of sugar levels when you consume foods. It also lowers cholesterol levels. Remember, cholesterol is usually linked to diabetes and other lifestyle conditions. So soluble fiber may help to lower the cholesterol levels, mainly by lowering the bad cholesterol. So fiber appears to help bile acids, which are made of cholesterol, to pass through the intestine or waste. Thus, the body absorbs less cholesterol. It also helps in weight management. And here, high fiber usually with high fiber foods usually generate. They take a longer time to chew. This slows you down and may make you eat less. So besides with the added bulk, they help you to feel full for a longer period. Eat a variety of fiber foods and a high fiber foods. And if your diet is typically low in dietary fiber, usually you can increase the fiber intake gradually. Sudden bulking up may cause bloating and flatulence. So we're saying that you may have been taking lesser fiber as your lifestyle, but now that less knowledge, I'm telling you this because you need to tell this to your clients as we shall educate the communities out there. So once you get the right information and you understand that this is the way to go, you don't just add at once, like you start consuming a lot of fiber at once. You'll shock the system and you're likely to have a lot of flatulence, tumbo inajaa gas, and bloating. So foods high in soluble fiber basically are the oats, barley, oat bran, psyllium husk. About the legumes, we have the peas, beans, and lentils. Fruits such as apple, orange, and pear. Also have carrots being high in soluble fiber. fiber. Those with insoluble fiber like the brown rice, whole wheat, wheat bran. We also have seeds and nuts, and also many kinds of vegetables, including green leafy vegetables, cabbage, and tomatoes. So understand basic concepts related to the digestion, absorption, and metabolism of nutrients. And this is very crucial for us, even in this topic as we package it. So I do hope that so far you've been able to understand the concept of the macronutrients. We have three major groups of the macronutrients. We have the fats, we have the carbohydrates, and we have the proteins. And we've tried to describe the role of each one of them, what they play in the body, what role they play in the body, and I do hope that you're at par. So next we would want to look at the digestion of these nutrients. How are they digested in the system? Where does digestion begin? How does it happen? Now, digestion is the mechanical and chemical process whereby digested food is converted into substances that can be absorbed by the intestinal tract and utilized by the body. It is the mechanical and chemical process. Mechanical because, for example, chewing, that is still the first process of digestion. You put the food in the mouth, ingestion, then you chew. Yeah. So as you chew, that is mechanical because teeth have to be involved. And then once the food has been ground into smaller particles, you swallow. That is also a way, it's kind of a mechanical process. You swallow, then with swallow reflex, the food goes down to the esophagus. Then from there, the food keeps moving through the system. We have chemical processes where you have enzymes, we have the bile juices and the gastric juices working on the food so that they can be absorbed in the body. So mechanical and chemical processes where ingested food is converted into substances that can be absorbed by the intestinal tract and utilized by the body. Remember, the whole process of digestion doesn't just end at the food being eaten or something. You have to ingest, you have to digest, you have to absorb, assimilate, and then there is the utilization, and eventually there is excretion. The food has to be excreted out, the waste have to be excreted out of the body. So absorption mostly takes place in the small intestines except for water, sodium, and end products. Absorption is the transfer of nutrients from the digestive system into the lymphatic and circulatory system for eventual distribution to the body cells. So here we have it that the lymph vessels and the blood vessels usually infiltrate the villi which line the intestinal tract, and the lymph and the blood vessels transport the absorbed nutrients to major branches of the lymphatic and circulatory system. Fatty acids are absorbed into the lymphatic system, glucose and amino acids, and absorbed into the circulatory system. The metabolism is about, in macronutrients, is basically the ratio of macronutrients, and also its calorie intake, and below is the digestive processes. So maybe with this, try to acquaint yourself with the digestive system of a human body so that you can be able to know where the villi are. We may be talking about them and you're like, what are these things? To understand more about the body in terms of where the intestines are, the stomach, so that when you talk about the absorption, basically being taken through the intestines, the small intestines, you should be able to understand. So basically, as you consume your protein, fat, and carbohydrates, usually in the mouth, the saliva moistens and lubricates, especially starches and fats. Enzymes begin to digest the starch and eventually chewing crushes and softens food like fat, fiber. So as you chew, there is mastication. As you chew, you break down this food. We said it's a mechanical process. Then the enzymes will start working on the shorter strands of the starches and fats. So that tells you digestion of the of carbohydrates begins where? In the mouth. So in the stomach, one, we have the carbohydrates. Digestion continues, acids destroy bacteria in the food, and some alcohol is absorbed. But basically, there's no major digestion process that happens. So nothing happens to fiber in the stomach. About a small amount is digested. It is last to leave the stomach. Then proteins. Here we have the acids that break apart the proteins and activate stomach enzymes. So the enzymes break the protein into individual or small groups of amino acids. So basically, the digestion of proteins begins where? In the stomach. Why? Because proteins, remember, most of them are acidic. So They need the bile juices, they need the gastric juices from the stomach to work on them, so that the hydrochloric acid that is present in the stomach to work on them, so that they can be broken down to smaller groups of amino acids be distributed in the body for absorption. The small intestines, pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. In these organs, usually carbohydrates, we find that enzymes digest starch, and enzymes in the intestinal walls convert starch fragments and sugars to simple sugars during absorption. What about fats? With fats, usually bile is produced by the liver and it is stored in the gallbladder. So bile is secreted by the gallbladder into the small intestine, where it mixes with the fat and makes the fat ready for pancreatic enzymes. How about protein? With proteins, enzymes of small intestines and pancreas digest the protein into smaller fragments and free amino acids. So during absorption, enzymes in intestinal walls break protein fragments into free amino acids. Then in the large intestines, carbohydrates are undigested. The undigested carbohydrates partially broken down by intestinal bacteria in the colon. The fats, if there's any undigested fat, it's excreted. Then the proteins, any undigested residue is excreted. So the concept of energy balance, basically energy balance is the relationship between energy in and energy out. So energy in is the food calories taken into the body through food and drink, whatever you eat. And energy out are those calories that have been used, calories being used in the body for our daily energy requirements. So this is the thing that it's always important to consume the foods we know that you're going to spend that energy. So we find that most people consume food but never get to spend this energy. And that is how overweight starts coming in and obesity. You're supposed to eat food and spend that energy that has come from that food, so that there is energy in and energy out, which equates, and that is the energy balance. Are we together? At the moment you consume food in large amounts and not all of it is utilized, the excess will be stored in the body, and that is how we start accumulating fats and muscles within the belly region, especially because remember, excesses of carbohydrates are broken down to glycogen. Thus, they're broken down to glycogen that's stored in the liver. A smaller portion is stored in the liver, and a major part of it is stored in the muscles. So once you consume food and every other time there's the storage of the same, you're likely to be growing fat and becoming overweight and eventually obese. So it's always good to take note and advise our clients accordingly, and even ourselves, we take care of ourselves, our relatives, and other community members. Now, maybe we can briefly look at obesity. And what is obesity? I know that you understand, you have this term time and again, but what basically is obesity? Obesity is a chronic metabolic disease resulting from an imbalance between energy intake and energy output. So that is basically what I've explained. The energy intake, whatever you're taking, whatever you're eating, consuming, that energy will be equivalent to what you're going to spend through that day. So that even if there are any excesses that are stored, they're not as much. It could be just sufficient for helping you during fasting times or times that you've not been able to have sufficient food. So it is caused by the interaction of multiple genetic and environmental factors. And among these are excessive caloric food intake, insufficient physical activity, genetic predisposition, family history of obesity, individual metabolism and behavioral factors, and the defining feature is excess body fat. So usually you have excess body fat in the body and obese. So obesity increases the risk of developing many conditions, including the heart diseases, stroke, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, gallstones, sleep apnea, back pain, osteoarthritis of the weight-bearing joints, and some forms of cancer, for example, the breast and the colon cancer. So it's important because, again, this is very common in women. You say that physical inactivity is quite common amongst women than men. So that calls on us women to become a bit proactive and exercise more so that our bodies don't become so dull, to activate our systems. So maybe I'll touch a bit on nutrition that you mentioned, obesity. When we talk about undernutrition, it's just a complex issue. So individuals may suffer from an insufficient intake of both calories and specific nutrients. Especially in children, we have choco and marasmus, which we call commonly PEM, the protein energy malnutrition. So there could be deficiency in either protein or energy or both. Yeah, amount that the body is not able to pick. Now, PM is common amongst children under the age of 5 years. But again, you'll find with people who have the wasting diseases like cancer, TB, HIV, they're likely to also waste away and have PEM, given that they're not consuming enough of the energy and the proteins. So in some cases, energy may be sufficient, but the diet may be lacking in nutrient content. And here the diagnosis of undernutrition is to depend on deficits in weight compared with standards. Some recent recommendations classify children as undernourished depending on their height for age and weight for height measurements. So low height for age, that is stunting, is much more prevalent worldwide than the low weight for height, which is wasting. So we do use the indices or the index. Indices is from the word index. Use the indices like stunting, wasting, and underweight. So we're saying that in the past we could basically say that if a child is underweight, that child is malnourished, but it's just one form of malnutrition. We do also have the wasting. We can check through wasting whereby the child has a low weight for height. Ukiangalia urefu wake na kilo zake hazambatani from the reference population. We usually have the WHO standards. Maybe I shall show you as time goes by. Then we do have stunting, where we compare the height and the age. That those children that you find that too short for their age, that is stunting, and it's usually a sign of chronic malnutrition. Had missed out on the most of these carbohydrates and other crucial nutrients. So today, basically, we were looking at the macronutrients, and our area of focus was looking at different types of macronutrients, and we've looked at them proteins, we've looked at the carbohydrates, we've looked at the fats, and we've looked at the fiber, which is still a form of carbohydrate, it stands kind of on its own. Water, we already mentioned that it's a macronutrient because it's still required in large amounts of because the body has a high concentration of water. So our focus today was looking at that in terms of the digestion, in terms of the function, and in terms of their sources. So I want to hope that you'll be able to understand something concerning the same, and we shall be able to catch up as you go through this content. And in case you have any questions in terms of digestion processes, in terms of their sources and how they function, kindly let me know. But meanwhile, that is what we have for today. So stay safe, and we'll interact.